I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Brooks Street that night. I'd taken the long way home with a warm paper bag of takeout on the passenger seat windows down the Dallas air, slipping in like a cool apology for a long day. Headlights washed over my windshield at an odd angle, and a familiar grill slid past Jason's car, easing to the curb like it didn't want to be seen. He parked a block short the way you do when you aren't planning to ring a doorbell. I watched him step out, glance down at his phone, and tuck something small into his palm as he disappeared through the side gate I used to cut through after movie nights. There was no knock, no pause, just the soft click of a key meeting a lock and the slow bloom of warm light across her living room floor. The air in my car thinned to thread, and all the easy explanations I'd rehearsed for months fell quiet at once. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comment city and state, and tap like if you want more true family stories where dignity wins in the end. My name is Claire, and for 5 years I believed in us like it was a job I'd trained my whole life to do. I grew up over my parents' little shop counting nickels at the register and learning that stability isn't luck. It's built in small, careful steps. Jason was the wind to my ballast, ambitious, charming, the kind of man who could talk a closing into existence by sheer will, and I loved him for it. When we married, we talked about building a life that felt solid, a first home, a child, the kind of months where you knew the bills would be paid and the fridge would be full. I put my grandmother's inheritance into the down payment and the first phase of renovations. He put in late nights and networking, and together we told ourselves we were building ours. Back before I was anyone's wife or mother, I had a place waiting for me in a graduate program, interior architecture, the kind of study that would have let me sharpen the eye I already trusted. I deferred for a year so Jason could launch a new development and promised myself I'd circle back once the dust settled. Then work bled into weekends bled into fatigue, and life chose its own order. Emma arrived with her quiet, insistent heartbeat, and my plan turned into a someday. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like prioritizing a team. I found a middle lane staging listings part-time, turning empty rooms and echoing hallways into places buyers could imagine living, and it satisfied the creative muscle just enough to keep regret at bay. Brooke and I met in the freshman cafeteria a decade and a half removed from who we are now, but tethered by those early, easy loyalties. She was the bright friend, the walk into a room and be seen person. I was the planner who remembered what time the library closed and whether we'd paid the electric bill. She held Emma the day my daughter was born and cried right along with me. She made toasts at our wedding and still knew where Jason kept the extra bottle opener. I thought of her as family because she never made me regret it. It's funny what details live at the edge of the frame before they step forward, how laughter over a shared joke can last a beat too long, how an arm can skim a shoulder like a habit, how late-night texts can be waved off with a grin and I send memes at all hours. On paper, our life fit one modest house with sunlight that moved across the floors like a predictable friend, a backyard big enough for a plastic slide and a raised herb bed, a fridge with Emma's paint-splashed masterpieces held by magnets that didn't match. Jason's work dinners turned into late meetings. My calendar filled with client consults and school forms and grocery lists. We were two people running the same race in slightly different lanes, and I kept telling myself that's what marriage looks like after the first few sparkling years. When I was tired, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a pencil and draft Emma's birthday banner by hand, and the steadiness of that act would calm my mind, measuring spacing, making something that said we were still a home. I come from people who don't air trouble until they've tried every quiet fix, which means I'm good at smoothing edges no one else sees. When the perfume on his suit jacket wasn't mine, I stored it under client hugged him because that's what he said with a sheepish smile. When Brooke joked, "At least you've got a husband other women notice," I laughed along and filed the unease like a receipt I might need later. I told myself distrust corrodes what it touches, and I didn't want to be the one doing the corroding. It felt noble at the time, the way denial often does when it's dressed as patience. That night in the car, watching Jason move like a man with a practice he'd repeated before patience stopped feeling like virtue and started tasting like ash. The streetlight hummed steady and indifferent, and the cool air that had seemed like a gift now felt like a dare. Somewhere on our refrigerator back home, Emma's crayon son smiled down over a stick figure family holding hands. On Brooke's living room rug, a different picture, weighted one, with a missing piece that had my name on it. I didn't know yet how deep the roots ran or how many weekends and whispers had fed them, but I knew the ground under my life had shifted. I turned off my headlights and opened my car door, the night pressing close enough to hear my own breath, and told myself I'd take one step, then another, and then one more. What I found beyond that gate will change everything you think you know about loyalty and the cost of mistaking silence for peace. Jason never heard me slip through the side gate. Gravel pressed under my shoes, every crunch louder than the beat of my pulse. His back was turned, shoulders hunched, as he crossed Brooke's porch like he belonged there. The warm glow spilling through her curtains caught him mid-step, his hand lifting toward the knob with the ease of someone who didn't need to knock. The metal scraped as his key slid into the lock, and the sound was enough to splinter something inside me. I followed him in without thinking, my hand shaking against the frame as the door gave way. The smell of red wine drifted toward me, sweet and heavy, mingling with perfume that wasn't mine. Brooke sat on the couch in a silk robe, legs crossed, glass in hand, her eyes widening as she spotted me standing behind Jason. He froze at the sound of my voice, cutting through the room, sharp enough to slice the quiet. "Don't bother taking off your shoes," I said. His body jerked, shoulders locking, while Brooke's glass tipped, a red stream sliding across her hardwood floor. The moment bent around us, suspended and terrible. Jason spun around, his face draining to ash, words stumbling out with no shape. Brooke pulled her robe tighter, stammering my name like it might soften the edges. I looked at her, my so-called best friend, and something inside me settled cold. "Don't you dare say my name like you haven't been whispering it behind my back," I told her, each word steadier than the last. Jason reached out, palms open, but I stepped back, refusing his touch. "Claire, listen," he started, but the excuses collapsed under their own weight. I let out a brittle laugh, empty of humor. "What exactly should I listen to? That you came here at 10 o'clock at night to discuss business in her living room? That you thought sneaking in with a key would make sense to me?" My eyes burned, but no tears fell. Brooke looked down at the floor, as if the shine of her own wood could rescue her from admitting what we all already knew. My heels carried me past Jason, each click anchoring me in place. I faced Brooke directly, not as a friend, but as someone unmasked. "You sat at my table last week. You watched Emma show you her drawing, smiling as she called you Aunt Brooke. And the whole time you were waiting for nights like this." My voice cracked, but didn't break. Her eyes darted toward Jason, pleading for him to cover what couldn't be covered. I turned on him then, my fury too sharp to soften. "You think you're untouchable? That I'd never notice? That I'd keep pretending while you slipped out of our life, one late night at a time?" He opened his mouth, but before the words could form, my hand struck across his cheek. The sound echoed sharp as a gavel. Brooke gasped, pressing her hand to her lips. Jason stumbled back, clutching the side of his face, his eyes wide like he was staring at someone he didn't know. "You destroyed our marriage the second you walked through that door," I whispered. I didn't stay to hear whatever came next. My purse strap dug into my palm as I walked out, chin high, heart hammering. The night air stung cool and raw as tears blurred the streetlights above. My phone buzzed in my hand before I even reached the car. I didn't call him, and I certainly didn't call her. I called Olivia. The moment she picked up, my voice was steady colder than I'd ever heard it. You were right. I saw it with my own eyes. Sliding behind the wheel, I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted metal. Through the windshield, Jason stood framed in Brooke's doorway, his hand still on the place I'd struck his face, stripped of color. For once, he looked small. He thought he had time, thought he could weave this web longer. But that night, he learned I was no longer blind. When I tucked Emma into bed later, her curls damp from her bath, she clutched Muffin tight and asked me to read just one more story. Her little body curled against mine, and her slow breaths steadied the storm in my chest. She was my anchor, the reason I could not afford to collapse. I pressed a kiss against her forehead and whispered a promise to myself that she would never grow up believing silence was strength. I sat awake long after the house was quiet, watching shadows stretch across the ceiling. My mind wandered back to the beginning, to the girl who deferred graduate school because Jason convinced me his dream needed me more. Once we're stable, you'll have time for yours, he'd said. I believed him. I believed in us. My grandmother's inheritance had laid the first brick of our home, and I thought building together meant building forever. Now those walls felt less like shelter and more like monuments to my naivety. Brooke's laughter still echoed in my memory, her voice teasing about Jason's late nights, the way she leaned just a little too close when he told stories. I'd explained it all away, told myself friendship could survive those blurred lines. But denial is a dangerous comfort. I silenced the alarms in my gut until the night they screamed too loud to ignore. When Olivia heard everything, she hesitated before confessing. She'd seen Jason's car parked at Brooke's before more than once, but couldn't bring herself to wound me with the truth. Her voice trembled as she admitted it, but I wasn't angry with her. I was angry at myself for needing proof when I'd already felt the truth beneath my skin. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was betrayal layered on sacrifice, years of believing, years of giving pieces of myself away to people who knew exactly how much I trusted them. By dawn, grief no longer lived in me. It had burned out, leaving something harder, sharper. Emma's drawings clung to the refrigerator door, their crayon suns smiling like nothing had changed. But I knew everything had. I whispered into the quiet kitchen, no more silence, no more excuses. Because the cost of betrayal wasn't only my broken heart, it was Emma's stability, the legacy my grandmother meant me to protect, and the dignity I nearly surrendered without realizing it. And I would not allow them to take another piece. The morning after I caught Jason slipping into Brooke's house, I didn't rise with the heaviness of grief. That part had already burned its way through me in the night. What lingered instead was an ache so steady I could hardly tell where it ended and I began. I moved through the motions, pouring Emma's cereal, setting her favorite cup of apple juice beside it. While inside, I felt like a pane of glass with a crack racing from edge to edge. As Emma chattered about the butterflies she wanted to draw for preschool, I nodded and smiled, making all the right noises. But my mind replayed the image of Jason's shoulders bent low as he slipped through Brooke's gate. That small, practiced motion haunted me more than anything, like it wasn't the first time, like it was routine. I had to press my hand against the counter to steady myself, forcing my breath to stay calm so Emma wouldn't notice. After dropping her off at school, I sat in the car longer than necessary, my hands gripping the steering wheel, as if it might tether me to something real. That's when Olivia's words circled back. She admitted she'd seen Jason's car at Brooks before, but held it back to spare me. At first, I felt angry, a sting of betrayal even from my own sister. Then sitting alone, I understood. She hadn't wanted to break me. She wanted me to see it myself. That evening, my parents invited me over for dinner. The kitchen smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, but even the comfort of their home couldn't settle me. My father watched me closely, his quiet nature sharper than words. Finally, he asked, "Claire, is something wrong?" I swallowed hard, staring at the steam rising from my plate. "It's Jason," I whispered. My mother set her fork down gently, the silver clinking against the plate. I didn't need to say more. She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip warm and steady, while my father's jaw tightened. They both knew. When I finally returned home with Emma that night, the silence in our house pressed against me like a weight. I walked past the framed photos on the wall, each one mocking me with moments that once felt unshakable. Jason holding Emma in the hospital. Brooke standing beside me on my wedding day. My own smile open and unguarded. I paused in front of the largest frame and touched the glass with trembling fingers. The woman in the picture didn't look naive then, but now all I saw was someone who had handed her trust to people eager to break it. Later, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at Jason's side, where his pillow still held the faint scent of his cologne. It wasn't the first time I had wondered about that smell. Months earlier, he came home late carrying an unfamiliar perfume on his suit. I asked, and he brushed it off with a grin, saying a client hugged him at a closing. I laughed nervously and told myself not to push. The very next day, Brooke had teased me about it, giggling as she said, "At least you've got a husband, women notice." I laughed along with her, but that sharp twist in my chest returned to me now like an old wound. The memories stacked, each one heavier than the last. The times he claimed to be working late while my calls went unanswered. The dinners Brooke and I shared, where she steered the conversation toward Jason's charm, then brushed it away as harmless when I questioned it. All those alarms I had silenced because I didn't want to believe two people I loved could ever betray me. And now, the truth pressed down, undeniable, crushing. I tried journaling that night, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote down everything I had noticed, every detail I had ignored, every feeling I had buried. The ink bled through the pages, my hand shaking as I tried to put language to pain that had no easy words. By the time I closed the notebook, my tears had dried, leaving only the throb of exhaustion. I tucked it into the drawer, hiding it from Emma's curious hands, but also hiding it from the part of me that wanted to forget. Jason came home after midnight. I heard the front door ease open, the sound of his shoes sliding off the careful way he moved, like someone sneaking into a stranger's house. I lay still, facing the wall, my breaths measured. He paused at the bedroom door, then stepped inside the mattress, dipping as he lay beside me. His hand reached out, hovering just above my waist, but I shifted away before he could touch me. He sighed low and heavy and turned toward the other side. The space between us was wider than the bed itself. The next morning, I studied myself in the bathroom mirror. My face was pale, my eyes ringed with shadows, but beneath the fatigue, something harder had begun to take shape. I didn't look broken anymore. I looked like someone who had seen the truth and could never unsee it. I brushed my hair back, tied it tight, and told myself out loud, "You won't lose yourself in this." The sound of my own voice startled me, but it was steady, and that steadiness mattered more than anything. At breakfast, Emma reached across the table with her sticky little fingers, smearing jelly on my sleeve as she laughed. That small act anchored me. She needed a mother who wouldn't crumble, who could draw a boundary between her world and the lies unraveling outside it. I smiled at her, brushing her curls back, and thought, every choice I make now has to protect her first. The day stretched on with Jason moving through it like nothing had happened. He kissed Emma's cheek, poured his coffee, and left for the office with his tie knotted just so his smile perfectly rehearsed. Watching him, I realized how many times he had fooled me with that polished mask. But behind it was someone I no longer recognized, someone who valued appearances more than the family who gave him everything. That night, after Emma was asleep, I sat by her bed and traced the outline of her tiny hand against a sheet of paper. She stirred and smiled in her sleep, holding Muffin close. I folded the paper gently and slipped it into the drawer with my journal. It was a reminder of why I couldn't keep enduring this in silence. My heartbreak was mine, but the fallout would touch her if I wasn't careful. As I closed her door, a resolve settled in me that hadn't been there before. I was done pretending, done smoothing over cracks that had split into canyons. The weight of betrayal had burned through grief and left behind something stronger, something sharper. The morning after I pressed Emma's handprint onto paper and tucked it beside my journal, I felt something inside me shift. The sorrow that had held me hostage gave way to a sharper, steadier fire. I brewed a pot of coffee but didn't drink more than a sip. My mind was already racing with steps, practical ones, things I could do to carve out space for Emma and me. For 5 years, I had been the woman who bent, who soothed, who carried the weight. That morning, I became someone else. The first call I made wasn't to Jason, and it certainly wasn't to Brooke. It was to the bank. I explained in clear, calm words that the inheritance I had invested was my grandmother's gift, traceable to me alone, and I wanted it separated from our joint accounts immediately. The woman on the line asked me a few questions, cheerful in that routine way, and by the time she confirmed the transfer, my lungs filled with air I hadn't felt in weeks. I pictured Jason reaching for his card later, expecting the world to open only to find the well had run dry. When I hung up, my hands were still shaking, but not from fear anymore. They shook with purpose. I scrolled to the number my cousin had given me months ago. A divorce attorney she swore was as relentless as she was discreet. Her name was Marion Ross, and when she answered, her voice was firm, efficient, not wasting time on sympathy. I told her what I had seen, and she interrupted gently. "Do you have proof?" I glanced at the drawer where my journal and photos rested and said yes. She didn't sugarcoat anything, document everything. "We'll meet tomorrow. Bring what you have." Those words steadied me more than any reassurance could have. Once I hung up, I opened the filing cabinet Jason had never bothered with. He liked to boast that our home was his achievement, but the deed had my name on it tied directly to my grandmother's inheritance. I pulled the folder free, flipping through papers I had teased myself for guarding so carefully. Now they were more than documents, they were shields. I stacked them neatly in my bag and felt a measure of control return to me. By mid-morning, I stood in our bedroom, pulling clothes from drawers, not in a frantic rush, but with deliberate hands. Emma's dresses went into a suitcase along with Muffin and her stack of bedtime books. My essentials followed just enough to carry us through the next chapter. I didn't cry over photographs or linger on the scent of Jason's shirts. I moved like a woman who had accepted the truth. Emma patted in, rubbing her eyes, her curls messy from sleep. "Mommy, are we going somewhere?" she asked, her voice small. I knelt in front of her, smoothing her hair back. "Yes, baby," I said softly. "We're going to stay at Grandma and Grandpa's for a while. You'll get to play in their big yard." Her face brightened, and her little smile gave me strength. She saw an adventure where I saw escape, and I was grateful for her innocence. By noon, I pulled into my parents' driveway, the tires crunching against gravel. My mother opened the door before I even knocked, her eyes scanning my face before pulling me into a hug that told me she already knew. My father came behind her, quiet but steady, and carried the bags without a word. Emma darted past them, delighted by the promise of a yard full of leaves and swing sets. I stepped inside with a sigh I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Jason must have discovered the empty house not long after. My phone lit up with his name again and again. At first I let it ring, the sound muffled on the counter, as I sat with my mother over a cup of tea. But when the calls didn't stop, I finally answered. His voice was sharp, frantic. "Where are you?" I kept mine calm. "Not where you think I'd be." He cursed under his breath. "I came home and half your stuff is gone. The accounts, what did you do?" I spoke evenly without hesitation. What I should have done a long time ago. Protected myself. Protected our daughter. "You can't just take the money. That's ours." His words cracked more anger than reason. "No, Jason. That was my grandmother's. The only reason you had access to it was because I trusted you. And you burned that trust the moment you walked into Brooke's house." Silence stretched across the line, heavy and suffocating. Finally, his tone softened. "Claire, please let's just talk." I cut him off. "You'll hear from my lawyer." I ended the call before he could answer. My hands didn't tremble. My pulse was steady. For the first time in months, I felt in control. That evening, Olivia joined me on my parents' porch. The Texas heat clung low, the cicadas buzzing like a steady chorus in the distance. She handed me a glass of sweet tea and studied me. "I've never seen you like this," she said quietly. "It's like you flipped a switch." I nodded. If I let myself break, he wins, and I won't let Emma grow up thinking her mother was weak. She squeezed my hand, and we sat in silence, the night air carrying our unspoken words. Inside, my phone kept buzzing, missed calls, frantic texts, strings of messages that piled up without me reading them. Accusations, apologies, half-formed excuses. I let them sit unanswered, each notification a reminder that he was the one scrambling now. Jason had built his world on appearances, charm, and control. Watching him lose his grip piece by piece felt like the beginning of balance being restored. By the next morning, the first cracks in his carefully polished image had begun to spread. A notification from the bank confirmed what I already knew. An attempted transaction declined. I pictured him standing at some restaurant, smiling too wide for a client, only to watch the waiter return with embarrassment in his eyes. Jason hated nothing more than looking small in front of people. That sting would cut deeper than any slap. I sat at the kitchen table, Emma eating her cereal beside me, while my phone continued to buzz. His panic rolled in waves, and for once, I let him drown in it. I had spent years patching over his faults, smoothing his rough edges so no one else would see. Now the truth was his to carry, and I wouldn't soften it. As I folded Emma's napkin and wiped her hands, I realized the shift had already begun. I wasn't living in reaction anymore. I was choosing the course, and every decision I made carried us further from the wreckage he created. The woman who once silenced alarms to keep peace was gone. In her place stood someone who would not be ignored again. By the end of that week, Jason's voice had turned from sharp commands to hoarse pleas. His messages piled up unanswered, his calls came at all hours, but I stayed silent. The woman who once soothed every storm was gone. I didn't waste my strength on his panic. Instead, I thought carefully about where my words would matter most and where the truth would carry the weight he feared. Sunday dinner at the Hale house had always been a performance. His parents kept the table polished and conversations polite no matter what boiled beneath. Normally, I would have stayed away, but this time I chose to go. Not to mend, not to pretend, but to show the truth. I dressed simply, hair pulled back, no makeup, beyond what kept me looking composed. At my side, Olivia walked with me, her presence quiet but grounding. I carried a folder in my bag, its contents sharp as any blade. The dining room smelled of roast beef and garlic candles lit at each end of the long table. His mother greeted me warmly, her lips pressing against my cheek as if nothing had shifted. Jason was already seated beside his father, his eyes hollow, his tie loose. He wouldn't meet my gaze. I took a seat across from him, sliding the folder onto the table where it sat like a shadow between us. The meal began in silence, cutlery clinking against china, words small and strained. Finally, Jason cleared his throat. "Claire, maybe we should step outside, talk privately." His voice was low, his eyes flickering with unease. I set my fork down and looked directly at him. "No," I said, steady and sure. "We'll talk right here." The room went still, every face turning toward us. His father frowned. His mother's hand froze midair. I reached into my bag and opened the folder. One by one, I laid the papers across the table. Screenshots of messages between Jason and Brooke, photos of his car parked outside her house, logs of late-night calls. I placed them in a neat row like cards dealt in a game where the stakes were everything. Gasps whispered down the table. His mother covered her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Jason lunged forward, trying to gather the pages, but I pressed my hand firmly over them. "Don't bother," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "You've lied to me for months, Jason, lied to everyone at this table. And while I raised our daughter, you were slipping into Brooke's house with a key I didn't know existed." His aunt muttered under her breath. His brother shook his head, and his father's face hardened. Jason's voice cracked as he hissed, "You're humiliating me." I let out a short laugh. "No, Jason, you humiliated yourself. I'm just making sure they see the truth you've been hiding." His father's palm slammed against the table, silverware rattling. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice sharp as thunder. Jason stammered. "Dad, it's complicated." I cut him off, my voice clear. "It isn't complicated. He chose her. He chose lies over family, over vows, over his own daughter's stability." The silence that followed felt heavier than stone. His father's jaw tightened, veins rising along his temple. Then he said it, words that hung in the air, like judgment. "Get out. Out of my house. Out of my sight." Jason's head snapped toward him, stunned. "What?" His father's voice boomed again. "You heard me. You've disgraced this family." Jason pushed his chair back, his breath unsteady. No one stood with him, not even his mother, who sat trembling, staring at the empty space where her son had been. He rose slowly, his eyes finding mine, pleading. But I didn't flinch. I gathered the papers, slipped them back into the folder, and looked him squarely in the eye. Respect isn't something you beg for, Jason. It's something you earn, and you've lost it forever. The words landed with the force of a stone cast into still water, rippling through every face around the table. Jason stumbled out, shoulders sagging, the weight of truth heavy on his back. The door closed behind him, and no one followed. I lifted my glass, took a slow sip, and set it down. "Now," I said quietly, "can someone pass the bread?" The tension cracked, replaced by stunned silence that said more than words. I had done what I came to do. In the days that followed, Jason tried to reclaim his narrative. A post appeared on his Facebook, A long string of excuses about misunderstandings and private struggles, written to paint him as a man cornered by circumstance. On Instagram, he posted photos at the gym captions about staying strong in hard times, pretending he was the one carrying dignity. At first, I almost laughed, but then I saw a handful of people, his drinking buddies, a few shallow colleagues defending him. "We all make mistakes. Don't let her drag you down." That was when I realized silence would no longer be enough. I started small. A photo of Emma's hand in mine captioned, "Some people value family, some only pretend to." The response was immediate. Friends, neighbors, even strangers flooded the comments with support. People wanted the truth, they only needed me to open the door. With my lawyer's guidance, we began releasing evidence piece by piece. A screenshot of Jason's late-night texts, a voicemail where his voice pleaded with Brooke not to tell me. Each drop was deliberate, each one cutting deeper into the polished image he fought to maintain. Whispers spread fast, and so did judgment. Brooke began to falter under the weight. At her office, clients started questioning her professionalism, her name slipping into conversations laced with disapproval. She tried to salvage her image with a teary post about toxic friendships, painting herself as misunderstood. But the responses cut sharper than any blade. "You're not misunderstood, you're a homewrecker." Imagine betraying your best friend and her child. She deleted the post 2 days later. Jason, desperate to control the story, booked himself on a local podcast with a host known for stirring drama. I watched the clip, my stomach turning, as he spun lies into the microphone. He painted himself as a victim, claimed, "I drained our accounts, turned his family against him, left him in a loveless marriage." But he underestimated the damage of his own words. My lawyer assured me, "Let him keep talking. Every sentence ties the noose tighter." That evening, Olivia came over with groceries, her eyes bright with quiet triumph. "People are talking," she said, unpacking bags onto the counter. "Not the way Jason wants them to. He's unraveling, Claire, and Brooke with him." I nodded, steady but resolved. It wasn't about gossip. It was about truth finding its way into light. Jason had always been obsessed with control, with appearances. Now both were slipping through his fingers, and I no longer lifted a hand to help. The first leaks had been enough to rattle Jason, but the blow that ended him came almost by accident. A friend of mine who worked in IT reached out late one night. He had managed to pull a backup from Brooke's old phone before she wiped it. "You might want to see this," he said. The file was grainy, the lighting poor, but there was no mistaking the man on screen. Jason standing in Brooke's kitchen, drink in hand, laughing. His words made my skin crawl. "She's never going to leave me. She's too soft. I've got her money, her kid, her whole life in my hands." The clip spread faster than anything we had released before. Within hours, it was on Facebook, Twitter, and even TikTok, stitched into side-by-side videos with pictures of our wedding and photos of Emma as a toddler. The hashtag attached to my name trended locally, then nationally. Jason Hilton wasn't the rising star of Dallas real estate anymore. He was the man who bragged about owning his wife's life. The comments were merciless. "Too soft," one post read. "Looks like she's the strong one now." Memes with his face under those two words flooded timelines. By morning, his polished image was in ashes. Brooke tried to weather the storm, but her company couldn't ignore the emails flooding their inbox. Clients wanted nothing to do with her name. She was quietly pushed out, though the gossip that followed was anything but quiet. She posted a photo of herself crying, claiming she'd been misunderstood, that the world was judging without knowing the full story. The replies were brutal. "You betrayed your best friend and a child. You deserve every bit of this." Within a day, she deleted her account, vanishing into silence. Jason, meanwhile, doubled down. If he couldn't win sympathy online, he would try to talk his way out of it in person. He booked himself onto a podcast with a host who prided himself on stirring the pot. I watched the clip with Olivia beside me, my stomach turning, as Jason spun his lies. She drained my accounts. She turned my own family against me. I was trapped in a loveless marriage, and Brooke was just an escape. He leaned into the microphone like a man convinced of his own performance. I clenched my jaw, whispering, "Loveless?" He begged me to have another baby 6 months ago. Olivia shook her head. "Let him talk," she said. "The more he spins, the worse he looks." The final blow didn't come from me, but from his own family. His father had always cared about appearances, about the Hale name standing tall in Dallas real estate. When the scandal hit local news blogs, the statement came swiftly. Jason Hale no longer represents our family business. We stand with Claire and Emma. I read it twice. My hands trembling, not from fear, but from the shock of finally being believed by the man who had defended his son for so long. Jason called me that night, his voice frayed, his composure gone. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "You're ruining me." I held the phone steady. "No, Jason, you ruined yourself. All I did was shine a light so everyone else could see it." The line went silent before he hung up, the final crack echoing louder than words. From then on, it wasn't just his reputation unraveling. His business deals began to collapse. The glossy ads with his face that once decorated billboards were quietly replaced. Restaurants canceled his networking events. Partners pulled out of contracts. Even his own brother posted online, "Hard to believe I share blood with this clown." For a man who thrived on being admired, the loss of respect was more devastating than any financial blow. At night, I sat on my parents' porch, with Emma asleep inside, scrolling through messages from women I had never met. Some wrote to thank me for standing my ground. Others shared stories of their own heartbreaks, their own quiet battles against betrayal. Their words lifted me in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was proof that silence doesn't protect anyone, it only feeds those who take advantage. Jason's silence, when it finally came, was deafening. His Instagram vanished, his Facebook went dark. But the damage was permanent. He couldn't erase the video, couldn't erase the words he had bragged with, couldn't erase the image of me placing evidence on his family's dining table. He had been exposed fully and publicly, and no charm could cover the wreckage. The night after the statement from his father went out, I stood by Emma's bedroom door, watching her sleep with Muffin tucked under her arm. The rise and fall of her little chest steadied me. This was why I had taken every step, why I had refused to break when breaking would have been easier. She deserved to grow up in a home free from deceit, free from watching her mother bend until she disappeared. The courthouse stood like a fortress that morning, its stone steps worn smooth by years of stories like mine. I held Emma's hand until Olivia met us in the lobby and took her upstairs to wait with my parents. I wanted my daughter near, but not inside the storm. When I stepped into the courtroom, Jason was already there. He wore a tailored suit, his hair slicked back, that same smirk he had used to charm clients for years. But the confidence didn't last. The moment Marion Ross set her heavy binders on the table, his smile faltered. The judge was a woman with silver hair pulled tight at the nape of her neck, her gaze steady and unreadable. She asked us to begin, and Marion rose with quiet precision. One by one, she slid evidence across the bench: screenshots of late-night texts, records of financial transfers, the photo of his car parked outside Brooke's house at midnight. Every document was a nail in the coffin he had built for himself. Jason tried to interrupt, insisting I was vindictive, that I was exaggerating, but his voice wavered. The judge raised her hand, cutting him off with a calm but firm warning. Then Marion played the video. Jason's voice filled the room, laughing as he bragged in Brooke's kitchen. She's never going to leave me. She's too soft. I've got her money, her kid, her whole life in my hands. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jason's face turned crimson, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly, his knuckles whitened. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. The judge leaned back in her chair, her brows lifting slightly before lowering her gaze to the papers in front of her. When it was Jason's turn, he tried to pivot. "Your Honor," he began, his tone desperate. "Claire is trying to cut me off from my daughter. I've made mistakes, but I love my child. I deserve another chance." Marion didn't flinch. She pushed forward the financial records that showed him siphoning joint funds for trips and gifts that weren't mine. She presented receipts, hotel invoices, even a charge for jewelry bought days after our anniversary. Jason's words shrank under the weight of his own choices. The ruling came swiftly. Sole custody awarded to me. Supervised visitation for him only if he could meet the financial obligations set forth. Child support at a level that would strain every dollar he had left. The house transferred fully to my name, its connection to my grandmother's inheritance recognized without dispute. Jason left the courtroom with little more than the clothes on his back. I gathered the papers Marion handed me, my fingers brushing the embossed seal of finality. Outside, he waited, leaning against the stone wall like a man clinging to the last bit of shade. His tie hung loose, his eyes hollow. "Claire, please," he said as I stepped past. "Don't take everything. I don't have anywhere left to go." I stopped, turning to face him. "You already took everything from me the night you walked into Brooke's house. This is just me taking it back." He opened his mouth, but no words came. I walked on my steps, even Olivia falling in beside me with a nod of quiet pride. The unraveling accelerated after that. His father's company formally cut ties, stripping his name from the letterhead and the glossy brochures. Without the Hale name behind him, his clients evaporated, deals dissolved, and the doors that once opened so easily slammed shut. I saw his face vanish from billboards around Dallas, replaced by newer, shinier names. Word spread that he was pawning his watches, the ones he used to polish with such care to cover rent on a cramped apartment with peeling paint. Brooke's downfall was no softer. After losing her job, she tried to lean on Jason, but without his money, he became another burden. The friends who once circled around her stopped answering her calls, her reputation too stained to wash clean. She posted a photo one night, takeout containers on a coffee table, a half-empty bottle beside them with the caption, "Starting over is harder than it looks." The comments were merciless. "Maybe don't start over by sleeping with your best friend's husband." She deleted the post within hours. Emma mercifully adjusted better than I could have dreamed. She was too young to grasp the full mess, but she understood enough to ask questions. "Why doesn't Daddy live here anymore?" she asked one night, clutching Muffin close. I knelt beside her, brushing her hair back. "Daddy made mistakes," I told her gently. "But Mommy's here, and you're safe. That's what matters." She nodded, satisfied, and curled into bed. Later that night, when she whispered, "Mommy, you don't cry anymore?" I kissed her forehead and smiled. "That's because I'm strong now, baby, for both of us." Jason's calls grew fewer as the months passed. The angry ones came first, blaming me for destroying him. Then, when silence stretched too long, the tone shifted to begging. "Let me see Emma. I'll change. I'll do anything." But the court order was clear, and even those supervised visits were hard for him to afford. I stopped answering. Hatred no longer lived in me. It took too much energy. What I felt was colder, quieter. Indifference. The final blow came when word spread that Brooke had left town. She packed up one night and disappeared, chasing some new life in another city. She had used him the way he used me. When the money dried up, so did her affection. Jason was left alone, stripped of the family he betrayed, the respect he squandered, and the woman he sacrificed it all for. His empire was gone, his reputation dust, and his excuses silenced by the echo of his own voice on that video. The months after court felt like stepping into a life I barely recognized, yet one I had been quietly building piece by piece. The shadows Jason left behind no longer filled every corner. Instead, my mornings began with Emma's laughter and the smell of coffee in a kitchen that finally felt like mine. I started a home staging business, the kind of work that let me turn empty houses into places full of warmth and possibility. It felt almost poetic. While Jason's career collapsed, mine found its first real roots. Emma thrived too. She adjusted to preschool with ease, bringing home crayon drawings of suns and butterflies that I taped proudly to the refrigerator. Sometimes she asked about her father in the gentle way children do, but I gave her answers she could hold without fear. "Daddy made mistakes," I told her softly, "but Mommy's here and you're safe." That was enough for her, and truthfully, it was enough for me as well. Word about Jason still reached me now and then, whispered through mutual acquaintances or floating across social media before vanishing again. They said he had grown thinner, older, haunting bars with the look of someone who had run out of places to go. Brooke resurfaced in another city, already attached to someone new, but neither of them mattered anymore. They had become ghosts in my story, reminders of what happens when betrayal burns everything it touches. One afternoon, while Emma played in the yard, I sat on my parents' porch and let the sun settle across my shoulders. Olivia leaned against the railing, her presence steady as always. She asked if I ever thought about Jason anymore. I smiled faintly. "Not really. He's like an old scar. You know it's there, but it doesn't ache the way it once did." She nodded, and for the first time I realized how true those words felt. Looking back, the night I saw him slip through Brooke's gate had felt like the end of everything I knew. But now I understood it differently. That night was the beginning, the breaking point that cleared the ground for something stronger. Betrayal had stripped me down to the bare truth of who I was and what I refused to lose. In the silence that followed, I found a strength I had almost forgotten. As Emma ran barefoot across the grass, her curls bouncing, her giggles ringing into the evening air, I felt the deepest sense of peace I had known in years. That sound, her joy, was my victory. Louder than Jason's excuses, louder than Brooke's silence, louder than every whisper that once tried to tell me to stay quiet. I had faced the ruin they left me with, and I had rebuilt a life of my own choosing. The lesson, if I can name it, is this: silence doesn't protect us. It only feeds those who believe we'll never stand up. Dignity begins the moment we stop making excuses for people who don't value us. And sometimes, the justice we wait for doesn't come from their downfall, but from our own resilience. So as I close this chapter, I carry no bitterness, only clarity. Jason lost everything he thought he could control, and Brooke vanished into the kind of obscurity she earned. But Emma and we gained everything that mattered: a safe home, a fresh start, and the kind of strength that can never be taken. Before we end, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you've walked through your own fire and found your way back to peace, I'd be honored to hear your story.